marched alongside their British and American comrades. When Japan's future emperor, Crown Prince Hirohito, paid a state visit to Britain, Anglo-Japanese ties became closer still. His visit to the fleet at Portsmouth, together with the Prince of Wales, was one of the highlights of his tour. In contrast, relations with America were strained by race discrimination. For decades, California's farmers had relied on cheap Japanese labor. But in the 1920s, fear of the so-called Yellow Peril led to a total ban on Japanese immigrants. And among those who had been able to enter, discrimination extended to their children's use of swimming pools.
They would clean the pools every Friday. The reason? Saturday, when the pools were clean, the water was nice and clear, the white boys and the white girls would come in and swim. Sunday and Monday too. Then, on Tuesday, the Hispanics, or the Mexicans as they were called at that time, were allowed to come in. And they would cavort for a day or two. And when they got through and no longer using it, then the blacks were admitted and welcomed to the pool. Then, either a Thursday night or Friday, just before they cleaned the pools, they would allow us Asian Americans to come in and swim. Even if we went to a theater, we had to pay the full price admission. Then we had to go up to what they called in those days nigger heaven, way up at the top. And occasionally, even on certain streetcars, we had to sit in the back. And so that there was a tiered discrimination against us based upon whether we came from Europe or the Hispanic group or the Asian group. And on the West Coast, we were at the bottom of the totem pole.
When the Covenant of the League of Nations was drawn up in Versailles, an anti-racism clause had been on the agenda. The refusal of the Anglo-Saxon powers to include it caused bitter resentment among the Japanese. Moreover, when the spoils of defeated Germany were divided up, Japan was allowed a much smaller share than she considered to be her due. More humiliation followed when the great powers met in Washington in 1921 to discuss disarmament. Japan was made to limit her navy to just over half the size of the British and American navies. The Japanese were left with clear superiority in the Pacific, but national pride was hurt. The naval representative, Admiral Cato, was so upset that he vowed one day to turn the tables on the Anglo-Saxon powers in the Pacific. But 9 years later, the restrictions were extended.
The serving admirals and officers of the fleet were angered by the situation thus created, whereby America was now in a position to defeat Japan in the event of war. My own opinion is that by this time America had already succeeded in breaking the back of the Japanese Navy, and thus had already beaten her chief potential enemy without a fight.
Britain added to Japan's gradual isolation. Under American pressure, she scrapped the Anglo-Japanese alliance, causing great offense to a wartime ally who had valued the treaty as a symbol of Japan's membership of the family of major powers. But these tensions at the diplomatic level tell only part of the story. To young Japanese, Americana was all the rage. The fruits of westernization soon turned sour. America's Great Depression in 1929 had a devastating impact on Japan, and Japanese nationalists blamed the attachment to Western values for the ills of their own society. Japan could not feed its population, which had been growing at a rate of 1 million a year. The farmers worked plots that could barely support one family. Much of Japan's staple food, rice, had to be imported. To pay for the rice, Japan exported silk. Silk prices collapsed, and as Western countries erected tariff walls to protect their own industries, Japan's export trade sank to its lowest level ever. Millions went hungry. Unable to reduce its surplus population by emigration, Japan turned to a drastic solution: the acquisition of living space in China, the great land mass 400 miles to the west. China was Japan's manifest destiny. Poverty-stricken, seemingly ungovernable, torn by warlords, banditry, and civil war, China needed law and order as badly as Japan needed space, or so Japan's leaders were able to reason. China had remained an independent country, but in the 19th century she had been forced by European invaders, notably Britain and France, to lease settlements to foreign powers. The biggest was in Shanghai, where Britain, America, and other powers ran their own affairs independently of nominally sovereign China.
Both Britain and America wanted to protect China, or rather they wanted to defend their own economic interests there. Their policies towards China had always been economically motivated. From the American point of view, any Japanese advance into China would upset the balance of power in the Pacific and wasn't desirable for that